Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Thanks for tuning in to Casual Conversations, the podcast with Dylan and Tony. Today we're doing episode 2, which is actually going to be an introduction to our bi-weekly segment called Overanalyze and Chill. So it's going to be the first episode of that. Just a little heads up, I guess. Wanted to release this with a little apology of why it took so long between releasing episode 1 and 1.5 till now. I think it's been, 3 weeks? Yeah. Almost a month?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's just been, we've both been busy and we ran into some technical difficulties. And then we actually ran into even more technical difficulties right before we were going to put this out. Which is actually our file got corrupted and basically something crashed and then our files got corrupted and that entire original episode 2 was lost. So we're re-recording this and we're super time travelers at this point because what was the order of episodes we recorded in? It was episode 0. Our recording process was episode 0, 1, 1.5, and then the last episode 2, episode 4, episode 3, and now the actual episode 2 that you guys are hearing now. So, we're just some folks trying to do podcasts and we're still really new and mistakes are bound to happen and this is just a part of the learning process, I think, at least.
I guess so. It's a messed up learning process, but it's okay.
So if there are some inconsistencies either in this episode or in later episode where we refer to this episode, might be because we're referring to the first lost episode.
Yeah, we'll just call it the lost episode from now on.
Yeah, which is the original episode 2.
Rip in peace.
Yeah. Rip in peace and rip in pieces, actually. Because that file got shredded and reorganized and it's all a mess now. But I guess, yeah, so just wanted to put that out there, made that known. But let's talk about the idea of overanalyze and chill. Basically, me and Dylan both watch a lot of shows and thought-provoking shows. I mean, we both enjoy our time of mindless media where we just use it to de-stress. But I don't know, at least for me, I prefer to watch shows that I have to engage in and actually think about. I actually enjoy those a lot more than the mindless stuff I watch.
Yeah. I think even with some mindless stuff, I find myself often engaging in things that I I don't know, I guess I'm finding things where maybe that weren't intended in the show or something,
Oh yeah.
Reading into it too much.
You create fan theories that are way deeper than the actual theories.
Yeah.
I think a very good example of that would be Inception. The fan theories made were awesome. And then the director came out and was debunked the ending. And it was pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
And it was kind of disappointing. And then even if I'm not paying attention to fan theories, I'm paying attention to camera mistakes and stuff. I don't know, just a tiny tangent. Last night I was watching Friends with my roommate, a little bit of it because I was trying to help fix her Netflix and stuff. But yeah, at one point Ross dramatically pushes all the pool balls out of the pool table so they could I don't know, be intimate on a pool table. And then things weren't working out and eventually he made this little joke like, oh, all these balls just keep getting in the way, and he like pulls out a few pool balls from underneath him, and I was like, wait, but you put all the pool balls in the pocket before you guys got on the table. Like movie inconsistency, you're pulling me out of my immersion.
Trying to get immersed in Friends. Oh man. This is what Overanalyze and Chill is all about, is overanalyzing even Friends.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do episodes on Friends.
Yeah, no, we are definitely not gonna talk about Friends.
I'm not subjecting myself to 13 seasons of Friends for no thank you.
No. But yeah, but what we are gonna subject ourselves to is, so yeah, that's like the segment. It's like we just want to watch and talk about thought-provoking shows and talk about movies and honestly whatever else. And talk about our thoughts on them. Try to kind of embellish the conversation a little bit more because, you know, like, as much as like thought-provoking shows can, I was definitely about to say as much as thought-provoking shows can provoke thoughts. This is why...
It's true.
This is
You're not wrong about that.
This is why I do a podcast, guys, because I'm really good at speaking.
Oh boy.
But, yeah, so... as much as, like, it's great to watch thought-provoking shows and kind of think about some perhaps new ideas or introduce some new ideas to your head, I think a big part of shows like that is to kind of deepen our understanding of things. And that's why I particularly like watching shows like that with, like, friends and see what their thoughts are and how it differs from my own. And I think the best show for that is actually what we're gonna start with, and I'm like teasing the hell out of this intro, but yeah, like, I think the best show for that is Black Mirror, and I think that it is such a good show for that, and there is so much to talk about with every single episode that's been released that each episode deserves its own episode to talk about. It because it actually has that much depth, and we can't just talk about Black Mirror as a whole. It wouldn't be doing the show justice. So the whole first season of Overanalyze and Chill is just gonna correspond to every single episode of Black Mirror that's been released to this day.
Honestly, I was just thinking that potentially by the end of us, like, when we get to the last episode to date, the new season might be out. 'Cause I think it would be coming out in the fall.
Oh, did they release, like, information about season 4?
I know that it's in production, and, like, they already have, I think, maybe a lot of it done. They had all of it written, like, because when they came to Netflix, they actually proposed 12 episodes, so they had already planned for 12 episodes. And obviously the last season was 6, so... And, like, I read a thing with the creator talking about, like, kind of themes that they're gonna be exploring with the new episodes. So I imagine it's already, if not, like, done, it's already in production.
Okay. And we have, what, like 7 episodes in seasons 1 and 2, and then 6 in season 3, so that ends up being 13. That's 13. We do 2 episodes a month. if we're following schedule.
Yeah, if we don't have technical difficulties.
Yeah, so that ends up being like a little over half a year.
Yeah.
Which, if season 4 of Black Mirror comes out in half a year, I'll be happy with it.
Yeah.
Just because the downtime of season 2, between season 2 and 3 was like, 4 years? Something like that? Because 2012, and then season 3 released last year.
Yeah,
so
I guess it was a while, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So look forward to a lot of Black Mirror on this show. Because, well, I guess we're stepping into why right now. So, I guess, like, do you think you'd be able to intro both what the name of Black Mirror means and kind of intro to what the show is at the same time? Let's see it, Dylan. Yeah, because I do think the name of it is very prevalent to kind of adding to what the show actually means, and yeah, I think those two could, if you could tidily summarize it, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, Black Mirror, the actual origin of the name, and I don't know the exact story of it all, but the idea of Black Mirror came from something that everybody should be really familiar with, is like any device when it's turned off is a black mirror. So and I don't know where like the story came from, because I remember reading it somewhere where like Charlie Brooker came up with, is it Booker or Brooker? I should know this. I said this in the last episode.
And I think in the last episode, I also agreed that we'd look it up, and we never did.
So yeah, he had some story about what, like the epiphany of coming to the episode name, or not the episode name, the show name. But yeah, so I think that's really kind of an interesting concept in itself, and I've thought a lot about with just, yeah, any device is a black mirror in a way. But to me, the idea of Black Mirror and the title kind of makes me think about this, something that we'll come back to with every episode, I think, of Overanalyze and Chill. The Black Mirror portion is just that...
The Black Mirror Chronicles.
The Black Mirror Chronicle. It's just that Black Mirror kind of is this mirror to our own society, and kind of like taking a good, hard, and dark look at ourselves and what is a potential future, but not necessarily just that, but like what is going on currently, which is a good kind of segue into what this show is. So if you don't know Black Mirror, for one, we're on this first episode, so we're gonna have a lot of spoilers, so go watch the first episode if you haven't already. But Black Mirror is I always describe it as the Twilight Zone of the technological era, and it's kind of like a dystopia kind of anthology series where each episode has a phone in it.
Just like this. I wonder if each episode does have a phone in it.
So, where was I going with that? Oh, so each episode usually is revolved around a certain kind of near future technology.
Or a lot of times it's technologies that we already have, and it's just not popularized or mass produced yet.
Yeah. But it's all I mean, even like the near future stuff is so incredibly relevant that I don't know. So that's something that's really unique about this show, is that it is eerily present. Everything is like, feels like it could be the next 5 years or the next 10 years or today, you know. And so this first episode is actually kind of one that I feel like is more like something that could happen tomorrow or today, you know. It's probably one of the least quote futuristic episodes. But yeah, so Black Mirror it kind of presents this technology or society in like a dystopian way and revolves around pretty relatable characters for the most part.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the strengths of Black Mirror is, as much as it is a mirror on our society and it forces us to look at our society, they do such a good job of creating characters that you really relate to, that it also becomes a mirror on yourself. Like, I don't think it's possible to watch Black Mirror without thinking, like, what would I do in that situation? Like, how would I do things differently? And it really gets your brain going and thinking about, like, could I have done things better than the main character, or could I have made the situation better for myself or for society in any way? And sadly, most of the situations they put you up against put the characters up against is very much a lose-lose situation, and I think it's very deliberate in trying to deliver the message of, like, if society is a certain way, even if you go against the grain indirectly or directly, you're the only one who's going to be hurt by it at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a reoccurring theme in a lot of episodes.
Yeah, there's rarely happy endings on this show where, like, the conflict is resolved, but it really kind of, I think that's why this show is so thought-provoking, is that it really,
I mean, it displays a future for us,
mm-hmm.
and then it shows unresolved problems of both present and future. And yeah, like, you really have to think about, like, hey, or is our world ever gonna line up with this world that they created? And when it does, what are we gonna do about it? Because even in our modern everyday life now, we have so many unresolved problems in society and in, like, humanity, really. And I think that adds to the, like, eerily realistic portion of it as well. And it does, another thing that I think it does a really good job of is altering minor things. Like, I think people are still people in that world, and although they're put in different situations, sometimes their society is slightly different than ours. Although usually it's not. Like, usually it can be slightly different, but it is similar enough that it is realistic enough to people. It's easy to think that if they introduce that minor technology, that is who we'd become as a society. And all of that adds together to, you know, make the show great. And besides just on an idealistic level of the show, to me, the show's a masterpiece. Like, I've seen the entirety of the show, I think 3 maybe 4 times now. And with every recording of these episodes, we watch it right before recording, just so it's fresh in our mind and we could take notes of things to specifically talk about. So I'm watching it with a friend at the same time, so I'm doing, like, my either, like, 4th or 5th watching at the same time right now. And I just absolutely love the show. And a large part of it is every single time I watch it with different people, and everyone brings in different thoughts and different things they notice within the episode. Because they're just such condensed episodes. Which brings me to my point of, like, besides idealistically being very thought-provoking, the filmography, the audio design of the episodes are all top-notch. And I think what really makes it such a masterpiece is its, like, storyboard. It's like its writing is really what drives everything through. So obviously part of the beauty of the writing is that, like, obviously the ideas that they want to put onto the viewer wouldn't be driven home very well if it was bad writing. So the writing has to be, like, top notch, and they just everything about what they do is so deliberate, I guess is the word we use a lot about the show, that any little detail you notice about anything can and most likely potentially meant something to the writers when they made the show. There's a lot of little details that are just one scene flowing through, or one, like, specific character, minor character, is supposed to represent an entire ideology or an entire portion of society very often. Or just, like, one like, little news snippet in the background of two characters talking can, try to open the window into their world a little bit more. And the writers do a very, very good job of that.
Oh, and I was going to mention, kind of, you had talked about how watching this, you kind of have different conversations each time with, like, different people, and this is something that Tony and I have talked about a lot, with how kind of the importance of conversations around this show is. It's like every time you watch an episode, I really think that you should stop it and talk to whoever you're watching it with. Or even, like, if you're watching it alone, you should really think about the themes of the episode and how it relates to society now, or kind of potentially what could happen. And that actually is sort of, if I'm not mistaken, this show is the origin of, like, when Tony and I kind of decided to have a podcast, because we had, like, a few days where we watched season 3 of Black Mirror together, and after each episode we would, like, stop it and talk about the themes. And I think it was this show, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Either this or Gurren Lagann. Might have been Gurren Lagann.
No, I think we were watching Black Mirror.
But yeah, so we kind of decided from our conversations on that we wanted to do a podcast, at least this portion, the Overanalyze and Chill portion of this podcast, because these conversations, whether it's Black Mirror or a lot of different media, like, it's really important to talk about these things. And I guess to me, like, Overanalyze and Chill is, like, a conversation between us, but it's also, like, we want you all to be able to watch these episodes and think of different themes and talk to other people about it,
Yeah, like, either talk to other people or message us and chat with us about it.
At casualconversationsthepodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. What's up? But yeah, like, there's so much that goes on that every time I watch it with someone different, like, they bring up new points and ideas, and I get a lot more insight into, like, how my friends think, and get to know them better as people, to see how they react to episodes of Black Mirror, really. And, like, me and Dylan have watched the entirety of the show one time already, and even watching it again with the same people, we just get a deeper understanding and actually think about some of the themes more deeply now than the first time watching it. So it is definitely very beneficial to, if not talk about it, just internalize, sit there, and just think about what went on, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you thought was like cool and amazing. Because a lot of these technologies are cool and amazing, especially to someone like me who actually loves technology. But it also is very important to note the social implications and possible downfalls and dangers of the technologies we have.
Well, that's something that I really like about this show, is that it's, for like a relatively mainstream show being on Netflix and everything like that, the show brings up so many important themes where, like, I think, like, we could, sit here and talk about the, sweet technologies that they come up with on this show or whatever, but I like that they show you a technology that they're not things that are inherently dystopian. Like, the technologies themselves are kind of intriguing oftentimes, but they kind of bring up like the darker sides of each technology, which I think is just really interesting for a relatively mainstream show to actually confront these ideas that may be relevant in the future or are relevant now.
It's like the idea that technology really isn't good or evil. Technology is just technology. It's what we decide to do with it that makes it good or evil. And yeah, until we step into like AI realm, like technology doesn't really have a morality compass. Humans do. But yeah, and all of this just we kind of tangented on why we love Black Mirror so much for a bit, which will become evident when, well, is evident in that we're deciding to talk about it for the next half a year, but also will become evident when you see how far in we look into these episodes. More importantly, today we're here to talk about the first episode, the National Anthem. Personally, I think this is like one of the weaker episodes, and I think it's very commonly labeled as that throughout the community. And first of all, I'm doubling down on the spoilers warning because, it's been a while. All of that before, like, it's just about Black Mirror. You could have watched that without watching the show first, or listen to that without watching the show first, and that's fine. But from now on, we're going to start talking about the episode. So this is the official, like, hey, turn away now if you haven't watched it. Unless you just want to hear us talk about it anyways and then watch it afterwards and look for specific things. Which I don't suggest, but if that's what you decide to do, that's what you decide to do. But I think it's very commonly agreed upon that it is one of the weaker episodes in a lot of different ways. I think, like, in characterization, the Prime Minister is one of the least relatable people in the show because he's not just a common man. He has a lot of responsibilities and ideas of, like, what other people think about him is directly impacts him a lot more than us as, like, the regular everyday people. And as far as ideas go, I think it's still one of the weaker, like, moral lessons. And, like, particularly as far as, like, writing goes, and how the show runs, it's sufficiently a different formula and gives a slightly different feel to the show than most of the other episodes. I tangent so often that I am terrible at overviewing things, so do you mind doing that for us today?
Yeah, so this first episode starts out with the Prime Minister
of England, because that's where the
right.
show is filmed.
Getting a video of the princess who has been kidnapped, and it's kind of like a ransom. Basically saying that her kidnapper is saying in order for her to be freed, the Prime Minister has to have sex with a pig. So yeah, it's a kind of a series of events plays out in which the Prime Minister kind of tries to avoid it, / his administration tries to find ways around it, but ultimately he ends up having to do it, and then you find out that the princess was actually released 30 minutes prior to him actually performing the act. And I should have mentioned that the act had to be on live television. So yeah. And then you find out that the kidnapper was an artist who...
I think that's like one of the best like things about it is like the kidnapper actually doesn't say a single thing in the entire show. You only see him watching TV briefly, and then in one of the final scenes that you see that he hung himself. And everything about the kidnapper, well, you don't know he's the kidnapper to begin with. It's... I mean, yeah. You don't know anything about the kidnapper to begin with. He just seems to be... Obviously, with this going on, a lot of people is watching the show, and that's watching TV and news to see what's happening, and to stay updated. And it's a lot of the background characters which actually really push the plot and the themes of the show, of this particular episode. And one of the people watching was just a painter, and you didn't think he had relevance to the story except for just trying to drive home the idea that everyone's watching this broadcast, even like artists, whatever. Yeah. And then in one of the final scenes, it's revealed that he is the kidnapper in one of the smartest ways, honestly. And one of the events that occurs is the Prime Minister's gets caught trying to fake the live broadcasting by using technology and hiring another actor to perform the act for him. And the kidnapper kind of figures this out and then kind of chops off the princess's finger and delivers it to a news station telling the Prime Minister not to cheat, basically. And you get revealed that that's the kidnapper because you find out the princess's finger was never chopped off because they found out that the finger was actually male. And then in one of the ending scenes, you see the painter who's been watching along with everybody else. He hung himself and his arm's dangling down, and you see that there's like bandage over his finger. And like that's the reveal of who kidnapped her and who performed it. And this is actually one of the biggest reason I think for a spoiler warning for this episode in particular. Is the first time watching through, it is kind of a surprise ending. It was a surprise ending for me, at least. Mm-hmm. Like I was like, I did not see that coming.
Especially her being released 30 minutes prior. That was like, I remember the first time watching this, that kind of gave me shivers, like thinking, just because you know that the artist knew the whole time that this event was going to happen, and so he just confidently released her, yeah, I don't know. I think that was a pretty wild kind of detail for the ending.
Yeah, like, that was definitely, and that honestly is kind of like a good intro to themes, is I talk about this often, but I think it's an important thing to note statistics and trends in people and what society is viewing. It's important to have knowledge of these things, but treat every person as an individual. I mean, there'll probably be other episodes where I talk about this idea, but this episode really drives home the idea that like you see everybody acts as an individual, but it's much more important to think about what we're doing as a society. And this episode's a very good intro to that theme, I think, because the whole point is, although everyone's acting as an individual, there are people who are super excited to see this because they're weird, I guess. And there are people who, like, don't want to see it at all. But regardless, they all sat in front of a television somewhere to watch this live event happen. As one of the characters mentioned, like, it's history in the making. And because we acted that way as a society, and that the artists expected that that's what was going to happen with us as a society, like, that's why he was so confident in releasing her early.
Yeah, he knew that everyone would be inside, and it actually shows at the end that the streets are like totally empty. Everybody's just watching this event happen, and that's exactly when he released her.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of those like beautiful things that's like you get first time is those over, what's the technical term for it? I don't remember. But the overviews of the city, like the several shots they do of the empty streets, like when you first watch it, it just introduces you to the bleakness of the situation of like, oh my god, this is actually happening. And it just creates that kind of impact for you. But when you watch it the second time, you realize you're like, oh, those scenes are to show the artist's like intentions. And I think that's like part of the beauty of the show is like the second viewing, or sometimes third or fourth viewing, are just as good because you find out new things, whether it's about the shows or about what the writers have already intended and wrote into the show to kind of preview you into what's gonna happen. They're like little hints that you don't know are hints until you finish watching it. Yeah, and the show does a great job of that in entirety, not just this episode, of being so complete that they overlap. Like, I think they shoot scenes with the intentions of you watching those scenes again after knowing exactly what's gonna happen, and it has a slightly different meaning to you. And I think that's just like mastering the art of writing in its best.
Yeah.
And this first episode, although it's like, I never try to sell people on the first episode. I like downsell the first episode so hard every time. But it's like, it is a very good introduction to how Black Mirror should be watched and what you should be expecting out of watching Black Mirror. But yeah, like, I think this episode does a really good job of like selling themes of Black Mirror and introing you, but I think it is the weakest for a lot of other reasons. I don't know. Like I'm trying to figure out exact like specific reasons myself, but like what are you thinking, Don? Like what why do you say that it's like one of the weakest episodes?
Well, I guess it's not a good representation thematically, I think, for the rest of Black Mirror in a lot of ways, where it's I think this episode is probably the most modern of all of them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it kind of brings up, it gets you in the mode of like bringing it to relevant issues, which I think this show's really important for. But it's vastly different from the other episodes in that the society is one in which is just like our, it could be tomorrow, and it's not necessarily centered around like technology in the ways that a lot of the other episodes are. And also I think it's just, it doesn't really have the same relatable characters that we see in future episodes, or like relatable conflicts or anything like that. What do you think?
Yeah, like talking about relatable conflicts is like we don't have to think about what the public views of us. Like that's not something that's important to us as everyday people. Whereas the Prime Minister, like that's kind of the majority of his job. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about world leaders, we like to think that their primary job is like thinking of how to run the government, run the country, or how everything should function, but their job kind of isn't. Their job is to keep themselves in power, and to do that you have to earn favor of the, well, sometimes rich elite and sometimes the populace, and almost all the time it's a combination of both. Mm-hmm. And because it's such a crucial part of his job that the idea of people being pulled online is not constantly, but it's updated several times in the episode. With the final time being most people expect him to, have sex with the pig to save the princess. To the point where his advisor up to that point, which for us would seem like a party leader of sorts, she told him, like, you have no say in this. Originally, she's just like, it's political suicide to not do this. And eventually it got to the point where she's like, hey, you have no say in this. The people want you to do it. The party wants you to do it. You're gonna do it. And as much as, like, that's a very good story, and, like, in literally any other show, I'd be like, this is amazing. Because it is a good episode. Like, if you haven't watched the series, just know to expect something different out of the other episodes, I think is the important, like, take-home message of this whole part. Because I think parts of what makes the series great is the personal connection you feel with the main character. And this episode is a lot harder to personally connect to them. And they try to separate out how you feel a lot more throughout the minor characters. Whether it's the nurse at the hospital who doesn't want to watch it.
The guy who is, for some reason, in bed all day.
Yeah, maybe it's his day off. Cut him some slack.
I relate to that guy way more than
the guy who's casually watching because he's in bed but still slightly interested. Or like the people at the bar who like made it an event to like all drink and watch this. And it's oddly easy to relate to those characters, but they are not the main character and they do not get the amount of screen time for you to feel very connected to them as you do in the other episodes. I'm like reading through the show, it's just like, oh my gosh. I just read to like preview to the next episode, and I'm like, which episode are we in? But yeah, I think you touched on all the main reasons why it's a weaker episode. And like a lot of people say I downsell it a lot, and when after they watch it they're like, whoa, that's a weaker episode. And I'm like, yeah, like in the terms of if it was any part of any other show, like I don't know, NCIS or any crime drama, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is the best episode they've ever had. But in the terms of the like beauty and masterpiece of every episode that is Black Mirror, and like it's so hard. It's just comparing like 8s to 9s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if every episode was rated on a scale of 10, which my scale is a little bit different because I don't believe in actual 10, so it's actually more like 2s to 9s. But that's another topic for another day. But in those terms, like, it's comparing an episode that's like, oh, this episode's really good, it's 8.5, but every episode of Black Mirror is a 9. And actually trying, have you sat there and actually tried to rate, like, what's your favorite episode, what's your least favorite episode?
I think so. I mean, but it is really hard. I think particularly with the favorite episode, I don't know that I could pick a favorite because I like all of them for different reasons.
Yeah. I started thinking about the Lost episode, and like we had much longer conversations about why we like Black Mirror instead of just objectively what Black Mirror is about, but it's fine. It's not a huge deal.
I know, it's kind of hard to like keep just thinking about the Lost episode.
Lost episode, so lost and alone and defragmentized.
Poor little buddy didn't even have a chance.
It's true though. But I got lost. Yeah, but it's just
You got lost. What about the Lost episode?
no. Don't forget the forgotten people. Don't lost the Lost episode. But yeah, like Black Mirror's just on that level for me that like if I was to force to rate an episode, the first episode is definitely an outlier, and there's a lot of reasons for it being the first episode, and I do think that for the fact that it's a first episode, it's a good one, but it is ultimately one of the weaker episodes. But instead of ragging on the episode all day, let's actually talk about some of the ideas that it introduces, which are really cool. As far as idea-wise, I think you can't watch first episode and overlook the idea that of media. And yeah, one of the most prevalent ideas, and I think it's more applicable now in 2017 than it was back when it was filmed in 2012. Why did I use two different whatever? Hey, that's called being American for you. But
as long as you didn't say 2012.
But I said 2017.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it still works. Okay. But yeah, I think something that's more applicable today than before is the idea that mainstream media and social media are becoming kind of really, really close and way too similar in a lot of ways. And honestly, they have the same problems but slightly different, and it's kind of a cool interaction to see how it played out, because in 2012 mainstream media was actually a lot more separated in the sense that you have a lot less people doing news shows or informative shows than you do today, and those two kind of interact in really funny ways. And I see it a lot more because I watch a lot of news shows on YouTube or shows that are revolved around specific social issues. Kind of like light versions of John Oliver or Trevor Noah's show. And I watch both of those a ton, and I don't particularly pay much attention to mainstream media, whether it's like Fox, CNN. Every once in a while, I'll pop up with an article that I'm like, hey, that sounds like it's in line with me, and I'll check it out. But because of that mentality, I think every form of media has relied a little bit more on clickbait, and it's a lot harder to separate the lines of them now. And I think, honestly, it's funny because us re-recording episode 2 gave us a little bit of time for more stuff on that to develop. Like, recently with all the ads pulling out of YouTube, have you heard about that at all?
No.
So a ton of ad companies are pulling out of YouTube basically because Wall Street Journal essentially declared a war on YouTube. Maybe not directly declaring, but they basically started a war with YouTube. And to that, I have my own ideas on what happened, like who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what they did right, what they did wrong, so on and so forth. But basically, Wall Street Journal accused YouTube of not being selective enough with its ad revenues. So it's convinced a lot of companies like, hey, look at this, your ad was on this person who wasn't speaking completely politically correctly or was being anti-Semitic, relating to a lot of different things. And some of it is like, I think some of it is justified, but a lot of it is taken out of context and blown out of proportion. But they actually managed to convince quite a few big names to pull ads from YouTube. And YouTube has been forced to... YouTube, as always, is pretty bad at handling a lot of things. But they're pulling ad revenue from specific videos, and it's just a bad situation. But I think the reason I brought it up is it's like this idea that mainstream media and social media is competing, and both of them are kind of becoming... Is monolithic the right word to describe it? No, I think I'm just trying to throw in a big word. Both of them are just kind of becoming the same thing.
That is actually, that would be right. But
But yeah, and I think that idea is very important in that it's very important in this episode because one of the main perspectives you see is the perspective of the news station, and they're stressing out those employees who are like, hey, we need to report on this, like it's already all over social media, like we can't hide it anymore. And the government kind of lags behind in this sense and just think like, oh, we put a red flag notice on it or whatever they called it, and it's gonna be okay, it's not gonna blow over. But that's not how social media works. And I think more important to that story than anything is our current wave of like Black Lives Matter, of like police brutality. Because of live broadcasting and videos, we can more actively be like, I saw that this is what happened, I don't care what the press release says. And to dial it back from police brutality, the recent United Airline thing is a much better example of that than anything, where we all saw your security guard drag the guy out of his seat, and like, yeah, they didn't directly try to push his head into the armrest or anything, but by no means did he just fall onto the armrest like the press notes say. And the idea that like the press has to try to get a statement from the police department, from aviation officers, whatever it may be, and they're still saying, oh, we need to personally, like privately investigate this occurrence. And it's like, okay, well, you guys privately investigate what happened by talking to people. We have videos from several different point of views seeing exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And the idea that the lag time between social media and the press, first of all, becoming closer and closer, and that being a problem to begin with is, I think, one of the driving themes of this episode.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in this episode because one of the details I think I forgot to mention is that when the ransom video was sent, it wasn't even technically sent to the Prime Minister. It was just uploaded onto YouTube. And so I think that says something really interesting. You know, like, you look at... Gosh, who was it? Actually, another... Trying not to tangent.
Yeah.
But another really interesting, relevant thing kind of relating to all of this is... Did you hear about the guy who robbed a gun store and sent a letter to Donald Trump? This happened like yesterday. This guy who's like, he sent kind of a manifesto to Donald Trump that's like really anti-government and kind of intense, but like he sent this letter to Donald Trump and then robbed a gun store, so he has like
an whole arsenal.
Yeah, totally. And but he had somebody, I don't even know who this person is, but had somebody record a video of him sending this letter and then just uploaded it to YouTube, which is really wild because you think about something like the Unabomber, like that guy sent his manifesto to media, but now it's like you just upload it to social media and it spreads like wildfire.
It spreads so much faster. And
like in this Black Mirror episode, actually, it has like this whole bit where the media is trying to decide if they should cover what's going on, but meanwhile, like, it's already spread through like every social media, so it's kind of saying something about how that is a little bit faster nowadays, you know.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I think I definitely do get more out of watching that episode now than in 2012 when it came out. Because back then, it was just like, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's new future. It's watching a dystopian film, and you're just like, oh, that'd be an awkward situation or whatever. But because that episode is set in such near future, we're already in that future. Like 4 or 5 years later, like, we're in that world already, where that's how social media reacts. Like, to get good poll information, honestly, it's being debated right now. Tangents. But it's a current debate that I think is important to think about, which is where you get your statistics from. Because people who, like, study statistics are almost always very, very well invested in and, like, very conscious of how they conduct whether it's polling or the experiment to find these statistics, and how, like, what are the pros and cons of it. And nowadays it's being more and more useful to just look up search results and algorithms on that than actually polling. Like, it used to be the main way we get statistics are from personal surveys, and like, don't even get me started about the downfalls of, like, internet polls or like telephone polls, because those things are so biased just by nature of how they're done that it's very irrelevant statistics. But nowadays, like, it is a source that's used quite often just by, you know, if you're interested in a word, you can look up exactly how many times that word was searched for on Google to figure out exactly like, oh, when did this word come into popular existence? When was it most used? Like, when did it peak? And when, and possibly start looking into insights of why that term started dying down. And information like that, like by the time the media got a hold of it in the episode and decided to start covering it, they already had like Twitter polls and knew exactly what percentage of the population thought that the prime minister should go through with it and what percentage didn't. And that is way closer to today than it was to 2012. And I think that difference in watching it in both timelines is kind of scary, honestly, because of how well Black Mirror predicted it. And it gives me a feeling of like, okay, how well did Black Mirror like predict other things that are maybe 10 years, like set 10 years in the future at the time, which for us would be 5 years away now, or like, you know, the like slight, how much closer have we gotten to these worlds in the past 5 years since it's been filmed? I think it's a very fun yet creepy yet terrifying type of thing to think about now when I watch it.
Isn't this first episode the one where there actually, like, several years later, there was a controversy with the actual prime minister having to do with having sex with a pig? Like, it might have been a rumor or something like that, but but that was pretty weird that, like, it uncannily kind of predicted this weird situation.
Yeah, it's like it's like one of those like crazy like conspiracy theory like stupid tangents, whatever. But
Tangent the podcast.
This is Casual Tangents the podcast. But have you looked into the conspiracy theory of like the world cards or whatever?
The what?
I think it's like World Card or something like that. It's basically this card game that was made like way back when, like I want to say like in the 60s or 60s, 70s, something like that. And it's like this card game that I don't know much about how it's played or anything, but it's this card game with different, it's supposed to be like world events going on. And it's supposed to be like a dystopian world event, so you could play certain I don't know how it's played at all, but it got popularized and this huge conspiracy theory came out of it because it there's like cards depicting like the World Trade Center burning down and like a lot of major events that like major / disastrous events that happen. There's like event cards in this card game that depicts it, and it's one of those things that you like have to dive pretty deep into conspiracy theories to find. But like, you know, the difference is with card games and stuff like that, it's too easy to fake. And like I honestly don't, I looked into it very briefly, like maybe like getting close to like 8 years ago now. Like it was a long time ago when I looked into it when I was younger. So I didn't dive that deep into the actualities of it. But like a card game could be falsified, put on the internet, put onto a crappy website, and then like it can start like a fire that way. But like Black Mirror is like a well-known show. You can see exactly when it's televised, exactly when it's produced, and when it can eerily predict the future like that, I think it's much creepier than some deep conspiracy card game.
Yeah. Which I'm sure we'll get into more of those with later episodes, which I think some of them have become more relevant since the first time I watched them.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, talk about, like, our lost episode, but, like, we've already had several things we've brought up in this episode that where the first episode of Black Mirror has become more relevant, which is weird. It's been like a few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been like 3 weeks since we recorded the last episode. And all the current events we just brought up are current events like within the past week. And we're diving very quickly into these futures and with technology it's always hard to have a timeline for it, and I always try to think of a timeline and try to figure out what's realistic. So there's like this idea of like what's early, as far as anytime you look at technology, it's like what's earlier than expected, what's a realistic expectations, and what's a like slower than expected expectation. And with technology, we as humans are very good at making technologies that come out earlier than expected. And that's weird to think about, but it's because we live on a timeline and on a learning curve that is like straight. It makes sense to us to build upon what we know slowly. Whereas technology and how knowledge actually works as far as humanity goes is like it's hard for us to see in our lifetime because we look at such a small part of the graph that it looks linear, but in reality it is exponential. And that's why oftentimes like technologies come out quicker than we think, unless we're talking about realms of like sci-fi where we haven't figured out the base science of it. But if we have the base science and we're just trying to develop technologies to manipulate that, it oftentimes comes out a lot quicker than we think. And in the terms of Black Mirror, like it's been 5 years, so what seemed like it was 10 would be 10 years away then when you watch it might be closer to like 8 or 7, which is closer to us now than ever. And just that exponential technological growth and how this show is such a technologically focused show in a lot of different episodes, it makes it more prevalent every day, basically. I know to me that was the driving theme. Like, that was the biggest theme that was most impactful to me because of how I decide to interact with media. But did you have a different theme that you thought was very important in this episode?
But I think that my idea of the theme is pretty similar to yours, but one of the details at the end that I really like about this episode was that after everything happens, there is like a little post-credit clip or whatever where the news is talking about like a year after the event. And they mentioned that there is like this critic who calls this event the first great art of like the 21st century or whatever. But I think that is really interesting because, I mean, we would assume that the public doesn't know that the princess was released 30 minutes prior because supposedly that quote file was lost, that part of the file was lost or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you would assume that critic is talking about this like spread of social media and kind of that the artist was able to terrorize the prime minister into doing this via simply social media and media, you know. So that kind of was a big take home for me, was how like realistic that is. Like I could see somebody easily doing that to some major authority figure.
and it would be regarded as such.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the most wild parts about this episode.
And I think that brings into one of the conversations we had in the last episode that I think is very important to not miss out on, which is all the different perspective of a story, which Black Mirror does a great job of it. All the ways I think of a story, and this is really where the overanalyzing really comes into play, is I try to think of the story in everybody's perspective, whether it is me as the audience, how I actually view it and perceive the story, how the writer intended the story to be, and how the writer intended for the audience to feel after seeing this. And I think those three are separate and just as valid points that can all be examined with any type of media, and it is very important to do so and try to see these different perspectives because they mean different things. Like the writer and how they intended the story to be and how it is in their head, a lot of times it's not how it's actually portrayed, and it gives you insight into the writer's like views and perspective and the message they wanted to impede. Why do I feel like I use the word in and im words all the time? Anyways, the message and story they're trying to convey is oftentimes like slightly different from what they actually wrote down, and then the actual events of what happened and how you personally perceive it, and how all of those individualistic perspectives of how to look at it are all different things. And beyond that, why I think like immersion is so important, to the point in which like I even try to immerse myself in like Friends, is like because there's a whole nother perspective, which is the perspective of the characters that are written, how the stories occurred in their universe, especially with a more well thought out piece. And it's very easy for me to start thinking about how the characters feel, how they react, like what is going on in their world. And that's why I think like your theme and like the most powerful scene in that case is very prevalent, because like if you don't think about that, if you just think about it in your world, you're like, ooh, like that is a really good message of how we all sit behind the TV, and the message conveyed to the viewer is like, oh, if we all sit behind the TV and watch these things happen, sometimes we'll miss out on what's actually going on and miss out on sometimes an objective that we're trying to accomplish. But like you have to think slightly further in to realize, you're like, wait a second, like that's not how the characters view it. Like that critic on the art piece of the entire event of this episode is talking about what you talked about instead. And I think that's just another like pat on the back for Black Mirror and how well it's written, and how it really pushes the point of how much you have to engage and like think about this show to actually enjoy it to the fullest. And like I've seen it this many times and I still don't think I've caught every little detail, every little thought process that the writers have put in, like every little intention that they put into the show. And I still don't think I've caught all of it, even though I watch every episode very attentively. But yeah, so we have our perspective on it and what the critic's perspective on it is. What do you personally think that the painter, the kidnapper's idea of it was? Because, you know, like he was an artist and he definitely did it for an art value, but like what do you think his like statement was, because they leave that very open and up to interpretation in the show.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it says something about society's willingness to like watch an atrocious act. Like everybody was like enthralled in this, in watching the prime minister do this horrendous thing, you know, for what? For some celebrity, you know. It's pretty wild to think about like that alone and how realistic that is. And I think that says something about what we value, and not just that, but like, I mean, I think even aside from the princess and everything, people are willing to like to watch pretty intense stuff. Like, I mean, you think about the amount of people who watched them, you know, killing Saddam Hussein and things like that. Like, people are willing to do that. Or, you know, every time you're in traffic and you realize that there's traffic because everybody's slowing down to look at an accident or something, I think that is somewhat the point of his piece. I guess we'll call it his piece, because it kind of is, you know?
Yeah. And it's kind of fun to think about, just because all of it's implied. He doesn't have a single line in the entire show.
Yeah.
In the entire, like, episode. Like, he doesn't speak once.
Yeah.
And it adds to the idea that, like, Black Mirror just does so much with so little, and it's absolutely amazing. The times I'm watching it now, I keep noticing how many scenes that are just silent, and exactly how many ideas are being conveyed at the moments of silence. And they have, like, just mastered the art form of giving you information without telling it to you.
Yeah.
Which is, again, something that I very deeply believe in for good writing. Like, if my favorite example to use for this is, if we imagine our world as a fictional world and someone's telling this as a story, and for example, the characters Tony and the characters Dylan's talking about World War II, like, I wouldn't need to give you exposition. I would just say, did you hear, like, during World War II when the Nazis invaded, like, when the Nazis did this, like, did you hear that? Oh, I can't believe, like, we never heard about whatever, and a specific event. Whereas, like, that would be a realistic conversation for me to, like, ask you, oh, like, have you heard about this? And you either be like yes or no, and then me talking about it. But I wouldn't give background exposition to who the Nazis were. I wouldn't be like, oh, did you hear about during World War II when Nazis, the party that's led by Adolf Hitler,
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't give exposition like that. And a lot of shows do a bad job of that. Even that example I just gave this time isn't that great. But Black Mirror doesn't do that, and it helps you be immersed in this world because they talk about events in their world that hasn't happened to ours as if they were events in that world, and they don't need to provide the other characters with exposition. This doesn't fit in as much with this episode, but this episode definitely introduces that theme, and a lot of other episodes further that a lot better. And the artist's message is definitely one that fits along to that.
Yeah.
And the crowd's reactions is definitely another point. Talking about the crowd, I think one of the biggest things that I got from this recent viewing that I didn't notice before, which I do think it's obviously deliberate and very crucial to the message it's driving, is the ending scenes when that ending news report is going on, commemorating the events that occurred in that universe a year later. I think they also made a very important point to show all the exact same scenes where people were gathered and watching the TV, watching this atrocious act happen. But now, not a single person's looking at the TV, not a single person's paying attention. And it says something about us as a population and our interaction with like drama news and how we are so pulled in by it, but and how quickly we forget big things that happen.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, that total amnesia of the events is pretty interesting because it like shows the prime minister making a public appearance and he's all chipper and it makes it seem like nothing happened. Like, this guy wasn't on the TV a year ago doing it with a pig. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely an interesting theme. Like, we like, as a society, we have our like quick fixes with this drama and then it's over and everyone forgets about it and moves on.
And I think it brings in a lot of separate issues. One of the things to talk about is how it relates to the theme of Black Mirror. It is a mirror on society and how we view things, but it is also a mirror to ourselves, like how we interact with society and how we interact with technology and society and everything, you know? And like, I'm definitely a victim of it. Like, I definitely do that as well. Like, if that event happened a year later, I probably wouldn't think much of it. I wouldn't pay much attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also it also points a finger at our society, because sometimes it's very important to. In this situation, it's not as much, but I don't know, as society, like, we look at immediate news and we don't think about why this came to be and all the things that led up to it as much. And a lot of the reason I prefer news, like media, through social media is a lot of those people have actually done a lot better job of putting into context of timelines of, like, this happened 5 years ago, which led to this event happening 2 years ago, which led to, like, destabilized, like, interactions between all countries, which led to this, which led to that, which led to why we have an attack in this certain part of the world now. And, like, I think the media doesn't do a good enough job, and us as society don't do a good enough job of thinking about that, both as in our current situations and what caused it, and because of that, we don't think enough about what we're doing currently and how that will impact the future. I think one of the, like, big things that I think about in that case, one of the big examples I would think about is the idea that the older generation often, like, be like, oh, you young millennial snowflakes, like, living off your parents and whatnot, but in reality, like, the baby bloomers messed up the housing market and now we can't afford our own places. And that's one of those things that gets overlooked when we are so tuned in to current and, like, sensationalist news, and we lose track of bigger societal movement and impacts that ripple through and affect things decades later and, like, decades in the future. Oh yeah, part of that, you brought up the prime minister. I guess, like, besides a societal level, there is a very big personal level and personal impact in these episodes, both for us as viewers and for the characters. So, as we talk about the world, like the populace not caring about the events anymore, it was very much still a thing for the prime minister in that him and his wife are no longer talking, and them being together is just for appearances. Do you think that, like, what do you think about all that? Do you think the Prime Minister could have done anything differently to try to mend the relationship between... Do you think there was ever a point in between of him being able to make the populace happy and try to attempt to maintain his personal life and keep his wife satisfied as well?
I don't know that he would have been able to. Because, I mean, as we kind of discussed, like, the stresses of being a politician like that, where you have to do things based on public appearance and stuff. It would have... I think it would have ended up the same way. But I was just thinking, I guess that kind of makes the Prime Minister's character a little more relatable in that, like, he... I don't know, we often see the superficial side of the politicians, which is, like, him, that little clip of him playing soccer or whatever at the end, like, that's what we actually see. But because this is a show, we're able to see, like, that him and his wife aren't talking, and you realize, like, he did a huge thing to, like, he thinks save the princess's life, and kept his ratings up, because they say at the end that his ratings are
better than ever, better than it was the same time last year.
Yeah, so but, like, at the cost of his relationship, and I don't know, I guess that makes him a little more relatable.
Makes him a lot more human.
Yeah. Yeah. Which most politicians aren't, so...
Reptiles.
Yeah.
Welcome to Casual Conspiracies, the podcast.
Yeah, so also Australia is not real.
No, that's just Minnesota.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this whole Australia conspiracy has nothing on our Minnesota conspiracy.
Oh my god. I think we should do a mini episode on the Minnesota on the Minnesota conspiracy. On my personal conspiracy that I made up. Anyways, I digress. Yeah, it's definitely hard to see people as people sometimes, for how silly that sounds. Like, it is pretty true. We had a pretty lengthy conversation about our jobs and how people don't see us as people at our jobs at all often. We're just viewed as employees, and it's very easy to do that for people in power particularly. But yeah, talk about, like, the characters on a personal level. I think it would do the episode injustice if we don't at least, like, mention and talk about the journalists. Do you think that everything the journalist did, between, like, sending dirty pictures to actually running into the building that she thought the princess was kidnapped in, and trying to, like, get the raid captured on film, do you think she was just doing that for ratings, or do you think, like, she actually has some sense of, like, journalistic integrity and she, like, wants to uncover something bigger?
It almost seemed like, I mean, the whole time that news station was, like, trying to keep up with social media and almost, like, top it in a way. And so I think her kind of going above and beyond is, like, trying to get the inside scoop to kind of top social media or something, I would think. Yeah. I don't know, what do you think?
I think that's another thing that the episode didn't give us enough context and enough, like, evidence to either. But I do think it's something very important to think about, which that in itself already makes it a valid point to be in the episode in a Black Mirror episode, which is, like, there definitely is a fine line between journalistic integrity and, like, doing this because you want to have your own private source of information, and not being like, hey, well, this is the release statement, this is what we're going with. And the other side of the line being, hey, like, this is my job. The more of an inside scoop I get, like, the more exclusive my content is, the higher my rating will go.
Yeah.
And I think that fine line is, I think every journalist walks that line, and every journalist, like, determines where that is and how they relate to it themselves.
It definitely shows, like, a different side of the of society's, like, fascination or with this kind of event, where I feel like I'd be more inclined to think that she's not doing it because she cares about the actual event, or like saving the princess's life, or getting the news out to people. I would think that it would be more of a rating thing. So, and that's one cool thing about this episode, is that it shows so many different perspectives on how people are enthralled in an event like this. You have, like, the people who are like, this is history. You have all the people at the bar who are, you know, excited about it. You even have, like, little snippets of people, like, watching very reluctantly, but still watching, you know. They're like, oh, you can tell they're disgusted. You have the media that is very interested in what's going on, kind of self-destructively, you know. And then you have, like, well, yeah. And I don't know, I think that's kind of interesting about this episode. I feel like the media is just one part of it.
Talk about the people in the crowd, like, I think much in this episode, much less than trying to relate to the main character being the prime minister, I find myself wondering, especially with people I watch it with, I wonder, like, who do they identify with in the crowd the most? Like, all the people viewing it. And, like, I find myself pretty mixed. I like can't put an exact finger on which single character I kind of like relate to the most in viewing an event like this, because it's events like this, I always take like a little step back and view it afterwards, and they didn't really have a character who did that. All are very in the know at the moment of, I mean, we have my own private Super Bowl game of not finding out who won the Super Bowl for the longest I possibly can every single time it comes up. And honestly, anyways, that's another subject on itself, but do you find yourself relating to a certain character particularly, or like where do you think your reaction to an event like this, who do you think would be most similar to your actual reaction through other people watching?
Well, I don't really feel like I don't really feel like I would be one of the people who would want to really watch something like this. You know, I think that there is, like, the whole idea somewhat to me of, like, being like, oh, it's history or whatever. And I guess I'm thinking kind of, like, about the inauguration this year. Like, I did not want to watch it. There was part of me that was like, you know, this is a really messed up event that I feel like I should watch for, like, that purpose alone. But I couldn't bring myself to do it just because it's just disgusting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with that event, with the inauguration in particular, I felt the same way about it. I'm just like, I'll just let people watch it, and I know it's not the best way to interact with events and media like that, but I'll just let people watch it, and then the people I personally like validate their ideas and the way they look at things. I'll just let them analyze it, and I'll just watch whatever feedback comes back.
Yeah.
Which I do understand that feeds into the echo chamber and like plays into being hive-minded and makes me have not slightly, actually, a significantly less individualistic view of the events, which is a major problem we have in society, and I'm playing into it. But the first part of solving a problem is acknowledging it.
Yeah.
But it's a problem that is definitely very difficult to have. I mean, a very difficult problem to solve, especially with the prevalence of what we talked about in episode 1 and 2 about like media overload and just too many things going on nowadays to keep up with all of it.
I guess with this episode, I should preface this by saying that I don't necessarily like if this were a real event, I wouldn't celebrate the action, but I feel like I actually relate more to the artist just because like obviously the way that he decides to bring up this issue is really extreme, but I think that the kind of what he's pointing out, or what I perceive that he's pointing out, is
something that you would want to point out as well.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, I was trying to think about like why is it that you think he commits suicide at the end? Do you think it's because he's like disgusted with the turnout? Do you think, I don't know. I think that's interesting because, it could very well be like the kind of murder-suicide thing where like, well, I'm gonna go to prison anyway. They're gonna find me. Do you think it's to prove a point? I don't know.
There's definitely a point to it. I think of it more as the writer's point of view, the writers of the show, because that's definitely deliberate. And to me, the like murder-suicide thing doesn't make sense because the way they depicted him, he was like untraceable. They tried to find him over and over again. They can't. And you could say like, oh, maybe he had the DNA on his finger and like whatever, but that's nothing in the show has presented that he was gonna get caught. And they didn't find out it was him until he killed himself, Did they? Yeah, they did. They like mentioned him, like, oh, this is the man. Okay.
So you think it was to kind of sign his piece in a way?
In a way, it's his signature, but to me, it's like, I think of more along the ideas of like, he thinks his task is completed. And if people don't get it, people don't get it. Because I think that's like a very easy way of like, that's a very good description of an artist, is like, I don't know. I feel like you would understand or you can describe what I mean better, because it's like if people don't, you being a musician, it's like if people don't understand your music, which a lot of people don't, like, would you sit there and spend the time to try to explain your music to people and be like, well, no, like this part means this to me and like I intended for this part to sound like this, like, I don't know. Do you get what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, sorta.
I feel like he felt like he put his piece out there, and if people understood it, they understand it. Great. Hopefully they'll do something about it. It's out of his control. Like, he doesn't have enough power to do something about how we interact with social media or media. And he also feel like he there's no amount of explaining that he can do to actually put his point out any further.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I get, the feeling I get from his suicide.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I definitely see relating to the artist in that way, it's particularly with what we do. Like, CCTP is like a passion project of ours to try to spread awareness, to try to like point a finger at these issues and to make people more aware of it and actually start, like, if nothing else, start thinking about it. And in a way, like, that's what his entire piece, what the entire episode in his perspective is going on, is him trying to let the world know that this is a problem. Because at the end of the day, he didn't hurt the princess in any way. Yeah, he kidnapped her. Yeah, that's terrifying. I'm not
traumatizing, but
I'm not denouncing kidnapping in any way,
yeah.
but it, as far as like you are shown in the episode, like, there's no long-term effects. Like, the princess is shown happy and like pregnant like a year later, but in the grand scheme of things, he doesn't really cause harm to society, but he tries to bring up these conversations, or tries to bring up this idea. And yeah, in a lot of ways, it's like, I feel like that's what we're trying to do with CCTP, is to bring up these bigger societal issues, bring up these bigger ideas of things that are wrong and needs to be looked at. So I don't think it's that weird to relate to the artist.
Yeah.
But I think we're also in a very particular perspective, especially with what we are currently doing with recording this podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are all the major themes that I mean, there are minor themes as well, but with this episode, I think those are the only like major themes there are.
Yeah.
And even minor themes, I think they are far less impactful or driven home as some of the later episodes, because it is so near in how it's basically not futuristic. And the minor themes are just like problems that we already have in our world instead of problems that we may have in the future. That it's in some ways easier to overlook, I guess. But in a lot of the ways, it's like not. It's easier to overlook, and so far that it's a lot harder to talk about because there's not much to talk about there. But yeah, I guess wrapping up the conversation about the national anthem, the first episode of Black Mirror, I guess to wrap it up is, where do you think everything we've talked about relates to the title of the episode, the national anthem? Like, what do you think the writers meant by that? It's funny because like every part of the show is so deliberate, but I know me and you tend to think a lot less about the title of the show than we should.
No, I don't know. Like I mean, I kind of have some thoughts on it, but it's hard to really like put them all together and like verbalize it. I don't really know.
But yeah, like the national anthem, it's, it's something that we're all supposed to participate in, and I do think there's a lot of like smaller conversations we can have about how we relate to it. But the national anthem's supposed to be this whole thing we buy into, like we all are supposed to believe it and kind of go along with.
Mm.
And this show shows how bad that form of hive minding, that form of just going through the motion, doing what's easy, going along with what everyone else is doing, like how negative that could be. Like, one of the people who was very important in watching, as far as the audience go, of watching the Prime Minister, was the female nurse who, after a while, she was like, it's been an hour, like, let's stop watching, and tries to turn off the TV. But she still bought into the system. When her coworkers stopped her, she still sat there and kept watching. If she was so disgusted to actually be like, I'm not watching this anymore, I'm gonna walk outside, maybe she... And maybe it alludes to the idea that maybe someone would have found a princess earlier and they could have stopped it. But that's not what we do. We just buy into this hive mind. We just go with the motion and kind of follow through with the national anthem and just believe that what's easy is right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what the episode means to me. And message that is instilled through just the title. But do you have anything else to say about the episode, really?
It's good.
After all that, yeah, the episode was pretty good. Which coincidentally, that's usually how people who watch it with me, after I like crap on the episode and talk about how it's the weakest and like it doesn't fit in, and they finish watching it, they're like, wait a second, that's the weakest episode? That was great.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually like pretty common when watching it with me. But yeah, I guess this is our discussion on the national anthem, season 1, episode 1 of Black Mirror, also episode 1 of Overanalyze and Chill, but episode 2 of Casual Conversations, the podcast.
But kind of episode 3 because we had 2 episode 1.
Yeah, because we had an episode 1.5. But you know what? It's named episode 2 for a reason, and it's because I love organization, and I just want every even episode to be an episode of Overanalyze and Chill. I've thought about this a lot, and I can't think of a better way to number it yet. So if you as Dylan or you as the audience happen to figure out a better way to number it that's organized and pleasing to me, then maybe we'll do that. But as of right now, every even episode is Overanalyze and Chill, and every odd episode is our main podcast, CCTP.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with it. But yeah, so this is gonna be pretty much the first episode. The only question I have, like, for the listener specifically about the episode is, like, where do you stand with sensationalism and the media? Like, is there a particular character that you very much relate to and find yourself being like, yeah, I'd feel like that person? And that's, like, the only real question I have after watching this. That's a question I'm always most intrigued with after people watch this episode, is how do they relate and what's the main theme or message they got out of it. Obviously, like, if you want, you could talk to us about any other things we talked about. There are a lot of things that are left blank for the viewer to fill in themselves, such as, like, the artist's intentions with hanging himself. But if you want to talk about any of that, like, hit us up. You know where to find us on Facebook, email, all the usual places. And I guess the other things I want to ask is, like, what do you guys think about Overanalyze and Chill? Like, we're trying our best to do the show justice, but did we do a good job? Or how do you like the format of everything?
Hopefully you do, because we already have the second Overanalyze and Chill recorded.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, any feedback would be helpful. And if you liked it, like, what did you like? Let us know. I'm just interested in making the show better. Tune in next time for episode 3 of Casual Conversations, the podcast, which will be called Automation Nation, because I'm not I'm not feeling particularly creative when I made that name, but it's going to be on automation and what impacts it may cause and what kind of societal things should we think about to brace ourselves for the idea of like a robot revolution. And then if you want to get a head start on watching Black Mirror episode 2, that's what the next episode is on. And just like this one, we're not holding back for spoilers at all. Any thoughts or things you want to leave all listeners with before ending the episode, Dylan?
Once again, we're really sorry about the delays that we've had with all of this. Unfortunately, we had some unavoidable technical difficulties and some were completely avoidable, but we're learning every day and we're gonna try to learn from the mistakes. Rather, I'm going to try to learn from the mistakes. And so we have a number of episodes recorded already, so we should be getting back to a decent schedule with it all.
Yeah, we're still trying to aim for the podcast to be one episode release a week, but that obviously has to deal with our schedule because we both have new jobs now and adjusting to schedules and trying to arrange a time for us to record and write show notes and edit and upload. All of that's work. So please bear with us as we try to figure this all out. And it's so bittersweet because like there have been quite a few people that's like listened and excited about it and like have asked me like, hey, when's the next episode coming out? And I'm just like, soon, I'm really happy you guys are excited and like enjoy our show. And I'm really sorry that there's so many dogs upstairs. I'm really happy that you guys are excited and like our show, and honestly, I really want to be able to do the best we can possibly do and provide you guys with the best experience possible, and that's something that we're working on and trying to figure out, and exactly how to go about it is still a work in progress, so just bear with us as we figure it out, I guess is what I'm saying. And on that note, I am still making a website for it. I am still trying to upload this on Apple and try to make it so you guys don't have to go to 4 different places to find the 3 episodes we have uploaded. Yeah, so there are good things to come. If there's any suggestions or anything, let us know. We're very receptive to criticism and suggestions. But as of right now, the places to let us know will be on Facebook at Casual Conversations the Podcast, on email at casualconversationsthepodcast@gmail.com, or on our YouTube, also the exact same name, everything's one word. Make sure you have an S at the end of conversations, or else you'll find something completely different, maybe. Who knows? I don't know where it'll take you. If it's someplace cool, let me know. If not, whatever.
Get over it.
Yeah. Maybe you should have remembered that S, because it's important. But yeah, till then, thanks for listening. See you next time. For now, you could listen to us on SoundCloud and YouTube, and reach us on Facebook and through our email account at casualconversationsthepodcast@gmail.com.